I wonder how much the Chicago Fire Stadium announcement impacted the White Sox announcement regarding the team's future ownership. So I discussed it with my guest on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, yesterday was chock full of good news in terms of the team's future ownership, beating the Tigers, and Kyle Teal's pending call-up. But the one announcement that I think really has a big impact was Wednesday's announcement with the Chicago Fire saying that they're going to build a new stadium on the vacant land known as the 78, the same land that the Chicago White Sox wanted to build their new ballpark on. So I sat down with CHSN's and Chicago Fire in-game host Gabe Ramirez to discuss the latest news surrounding the White Sox announcement regarding Jerry Reinsdorf eventually selling the White Sox to billionaire Justin Ishbia and the team's pursuit of a new stadium and the impact the Fire has on what the Sox will do regarding a new park. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So let's dive into my conversation with Gabe Ramirez. This might be more asking for a hunch, unless you do got some intel, but does this ownership succession announcement feel like a reaction to the Fire's announcement of the stadium on the 78?
Yeah, I think most of us feel that way, right? Me as a Sox fan, if I take off my Chicago Fire hat, it certainly feels reactionary, right? Where, even following the news of the Chicago Fire Stadium, the White Sox and related released that statement saying that there's still a possibility that the White Sox could have a home or find themselves a home in the 78. So a few days later after that, all of a sudden you hear the Ishbias coming in and obviously laying down the foundation for them to take over ownership of the Chicago White Sox. And I mean, you could call it coincidental, but to release the news a few days later, it certainly feels like it is a reactionary move.
All right. How impressive of a move is this for Joe Mansueto to basically, call dibs on the 78? And now that you got like the social media was literally dibs.
It's just so amazing, right? I mean, I saw that and I'm shout out to Connor, shout out to Mac, shout out to Emily, shout out to Jeremy. That's the digital team over with the Chicago Fire. And they do an incredible job, right? I work closely with them. And so, but when I saw that video, I was like, oh my God, that's like real shots fired. That's not just, just like a casual, social media video you want to put out there. But yeah, I think that was impressive, the dibs video, but even more impressive, obviously, Joe Mansueto, right? Yeah. I think, I was talking to my brother about this yesterday, Todd, and I said, imagine if you had $7 billion and you owned a team. You wouldn't blink at the idea or the notion of spending a sixth of it or close to it on a stadium for your team that, let's not forget, right? I mean, if we look at it from a real estate standpoint or just, an ownership standpoint, if I buy a $650 million stadium, my team in value increases, probably the same amount, right? So I'm getting a dollar for dollar return at the very minimum So Joe Mansueto is a very savvy businessman. He understands the Chicago market. And I think when you're looking at MLS as a whole, Todd, and where the Chicago Fire are at currently and where they should be, right? They should be a team in MLS that is constantly at the top of the table. And I think what this stadium does, as well as the Performance Center, it really just showcases his desire and his passion for truly wanting to bring a winner here to the city of Chicago.
And what I really think that's impressive about him is he's got no problem writing checks to solve big picture problems. Didn't he break the lease to get out of SeatGeek Stadium, all that? Like, he's got no problem saying, okay, this is a drop in the bucket because big picture time, I can make more money,
It's an obvious no-brainer, right? When you're really thinking about that, you say to yourself, all right, if I buy the team and I'm a billionaire, I don't want you playing in Bridgeview. And no shade at Bridgeview. SeatGeek Stadium is amazing. The Chicago Fire still play some of their home games there, and Chicago Fire 2, FC2, play all of their matches there as well in the present. But again, think about you and I, Todd, right? Like me and you, we were the owners and we had, let's just call it unlimited funds. You're like, yeah, no, I don't want to. I don't even live near Bridgeview. I want to be downtown in Soldier Field. I want to be close to the masses, especially when you're in real time witnessing the gap in fandom for your team, right? Where you're like, I'm in Bridgeview and we don't draw a ton of fans, and Chicago doesn't even care about my team. Well, I guess I got to go back to Soldier Field so that I can get more eyes and it can be relevant. And then, as you mentioned, they paid the money there. Then he paid $100 million of his own money to build the Endeavor Health Performance Center right there on Roosevelt and Ashland. And already it's paid dividends. The U.S. men's national team is there. Manchester United, I believe one other Premier League team is going to be practicing there over the summer. So again, what are you doing in that sense? Well, let's talk about the B-level players on Man United, the B-level players for any other Premier League team. When they see the facility, when they see the city, all of a sudden they're talking and they're saying, man, MLS, Chicago Fire, they got something good over there, right? So it's just about creating the buzz. And I think he understands that as a businessman. And then the final cherry on top being the blank check for six that was filled in for 650 million to do this new stadium. And again, I just think he has the foresight and the pockets to understand what this means not only for MLS but for the city of Chicago as well.
And I'm praying Justin Ishbia has that same type of foresight as Joe Mansueto, just because if you have that type of owner, yeah, you're going to have your misses on the field. It's going to happen. Not every move is going to work, but at least if you got guys that are willing to take swings, you are bound to get something successful.
Yeah, and I think that's what you and I and most Sox fans are hoping with Justin Ishbia. Listen, I'm a big fan of Jerry Reinsdorf. I know a lot of people are not, but I personally, my degree, Todd, is not in like media communications. It's in economics. So I love business. I used to work in finance. I used to work at H&R Block. I love numbers. I love business. So when I see Jerry Reinsdorf, I kind of get it, right? Whether it's Stadium, the channel that he owned prior to moving it over to CHSN, owning his own regional sports network, operating a team that, let's be honest, the Cubs are the belle of the ball in the city of Chicago and the present. Even when the Sox won the World Series, it wasn't like there was a wave of support for the team. So again, I think, he as a businessman, I value him as that, but a lot of people don't. So the Justin Ishbia thing, what most people are hoping for is that same thing that Joe Mansueto is doing, right? Where he doesn't balk at an amount of money, where we know Justin Ishbia will be paying somebody over $100 million for the first time, as the owner of the Chicago White Sox. And he has no problem doing so, right? I mean, these are guys at that level, Todd, where if those guys, not me, if I spend $100 million, I'm gonna make it back in 3 months. Like, right? Like billions make billions. And they understand that, and they know they're gonna get it back. But even more so than that, if Justin Ishbia comes in, adds top talent, let's just say he goes ahead and becomes a second tenant in the 78. What does that do to the value of the franchise? I mean, again, these guys are smart, and it increases the value and visibility. And then you seem as somewhat of a savior. But let's be very clear. Ishbia and Joe Mansueto, very similar stories, right? Guys that are not from Chicago proper, that have grown their business and earned their wealth here in our city and have fallen in love with it and understand the importance of the sports culture here. And so if that's what you ultimately want as a fan, you want someone with money to come in and, inject your franchise with it and take them to the top. And I think that's what Sox fans are hoping. And I really genuinely hope he does do that.
Now, the one thing though is at least in the numbers, the Fire are actually a bigger draw than the White Sox, at least right now. I mean, things could always change if the White Sox ever got better. So if you're related Midwest, do you just stick with, hey, let's just go with the Fire, or do you try to shoehorn two stadiums in, because it's 62 acres? You could get two stadiums in there, but it might just be a headache to try to make everybody happy. And do you want to basically eliminate the potential of now you don't have as many condos to build, for example?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the space, and I made this reference earlier this week on the Chicago Lead on Chicago Sports Network, I accidentally rode my scooter through the 78 back in the fall. And I mean, it's a big space, right? But at the same time, I'm not sure how residential you're going to be able to make that area, right? So I think of other cities across the U.S., Detroit, for example, where Ford Field is right next to Comerica, right? Kansas City, before they had the new stadium, the Royals and the Chiefs, their stadiums were right next to each other. It does exist where stadiums are next to each other. And I think in Chicago, obviously extremely difficult when you're thinking about the stadiums that are currently in place. But when you have a swath of land like the 78 where you can create, right, whatever your heart desires, it's not far-fetched to think that two stadiums could coexist in that area. Now, I'm not saying that I have inside information that it will or that they're going to or anything of the sorts. I'm speaking purely as a Chicagoan who loves both of these teams and would love there to be the 78th neighborhood in the city of Chicago to be one dedicated to both franchises.
Quick break for those listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. But after the break, I'll have more with my conversation with Gabe Ramirez of CHSN and the Chicago Fire. Let's be real. Coffee isn't just a drink. It's a ritual, a lifeline, the thing that gets you from half asleep to fully functioning. And I can attest to that. And if it's that essential, why settle for anything less than amazing? And that's where Trade Coffee comes in. Trade is the #1 coffee destination in the U.S., delivering fresh, incredible coffee from over 50 of the country's top roasters. Whether you're a cold brew fan or a pour-over purist, they've got a roast you'll love. And you know me, I love my coffee. Big fan of a good dark roast. And after taking the Trade quiz, I'm looking forward to trying out the new brands they're sending me because I'm no grocery store coffee buyer. You darn right I spring a little for the good stuff. And Trade Coffee has a ton of brands to send you that will help you get going in the morning and enjoy it throughout the day. And if the first match isn't perfect, Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. And right now, Trade is exclusively offering our customers 50% off your 1-month trial at drinktrade.com/LockedOnMLB. That's TRADE.com/LockedOnMLB for 50% off your 1-month trial. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Going to make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. The one thing, though, that I do think that no matter what this announcement has with Mansueto and even the ownership, there's no way I don't think they're ever going to get the $1 billion in publicly funded, to publicly finance a ballpark for the White Sox, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, obviously, Governor, Pritzker has made it very clear in terms of what he feels or where he feels funds should be allocated. So yeah, I mean, it's tough, but again, it's Chicago, and what we think on the surface more often than not is not what ends up rising to the top. So I'll say that. I mean, look at the 78 and the Fire, right? I mean, it was thrown around, but no one was talking about them being the premier tenant. And look what happened. I mean, I just think it's something that happens in Chicago, and I think all cards are on the table and available in the present.
Do you think Joe just got tired of being patient? Because the other thing is what is cracking me up about the coverage, and I'm sure you're probably kind of noticing it too. This was announced, this was hinted back in October. I remember doing a show about it, and all of a sudden now, do you think he just got impatient because it sounded like the White Sox were still having to wait on what are the Bears going to do, and did he just finally say, you know what, that's it, I'm just making the announcement, I'm going with it, and I'm calling dibs?
Yeah, I wouldn't. Obviously, I can't speak for Mr. Mansueto, but I can say that there were options on the table, right? Public options, right? I mean, when you look out and the internet, you saw the Lincoln Yards on the north side was a potential site for the Chicago Fire to house their new stadium, as was the 78, as was the Michael Reese Center. I mean, there was different sites that were available. And I think Joe Mansueto, what he leveraged, Todd, was the building of the Endeavor Health Performance Center, right? Chicago's a political town. You got to, rub everyone the right way. And I think proving to the city, to the aldermans, to the constituents that he was going to do right by the community, by the city, and he did that. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of pushback with Chicago Housing Authority, with Joe Mansueto, but what he's done to that area and the funds that he's promised to the community, I mean, those go hand in hand. I had the luxury of hosting the groundbreaking ceremony for the Endeavor Health Performance Center, and Joe Mansueto said just that, right? Talking about the investment back into the community. So again, I think once you've laid that foundation down, then it makes purchasing land and the PR that comes with it a bit more palatable. And so I don't know if it was necessarily impatience. I think it was timing and everything falling into the place the way that he did. And let's not forget, in the in the interview that I did with Joe and David Baldwin, the president of Chicago Fire, they both mentioned and forced down our throat, this is privately funded, right? So it's a lot easier to walk to a plot of land and say, hey, I will build this. Don't worry about it. And I think that might be the portion where, his patience ran thin, where he's like, I don't have to wait for anything. I got the money. I could do this. And I think that's what we're seeing in real time play out.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing that I'm actually frustrated. The only disappointment I have actually on today's announcement with we're recording today for tomorrow.
Yeah.
But today's announcement was why, Jerry should just get out now and let the Ishbias, because the Ishbias also have the money to cut a check and be like, yeah, let's just develop the 78 right now. And Related Midwest has got to be like, okay, let's get going, because this plot of land's been sitting empty for how many years? Like what, 30, 40 years?
Yeah, almost 50 years, man, right? Since the 70s, it's been vacant. But I think you're absolutely right. I wonder, because I know you read what I read, where, Justin, or the Ishbias, I should say, are going to be injecting capital into the organization to pay down debt, obviously for other things that the White Sox are doing. So again, I go back to Jerry being a savvy businessman, right? Like, why would I want to get out with debt when I got this guy that could pay it down for me? When I got this guy that can, make my stadium look nicer, and he's willing to do it over the course of 4 years, where I have the option to sell it to you. And if I don't, then you just got to sit back and wait. Again, it's very savvy by Jerry. And I know a lot of people don't like hearing stuff like that. But I mean, when you break it down from a business standpoint, this is a genius deal, not just for the Ishbias, but also for the Reinsdorfs.
Actually what you're making, and I've had Ozzie Guillen Jr., for example, on the show too. And he's described, not that like Jerry Reinsdorf is a good man. Sometimes I do have to pause the brakes as like a human being. He's actually a good man. The only thing that I've disagreed with him as a owner is he looks at too much of the costs rather than these are the costs that will make you even more money. For example, scouting and development. I hate how baseball teams look at scouts, for example, as cost. No, scouts are the guys that find you the product, especially product. The other next thing I hate about owners is when they always talk about young players. Well, they're cheap. No, you want young players because they're in their peak performance years. You should be investing in that type of stuff. And then, yes, into free agency because of draws. That's just my only frustration as Jerry as a businessman, because you're right. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, even if we finish second place, if you're coming in September, you're still watching meaningful games. I get that as a baseball man, as a perspective. But again, you don't win with the best balance sheet. And that's the only thing that I ever push back on when it comes to that, because I fully agree with you. As a businessman, Jerry's a good businessman. But did he get basically outmaneuvered in this case?
You talking about outmaneuvered with the Ishbia?
In the 78. Yeah, with the 78.
Oh,
actually,
the 78.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Again, and I know people don't want to hear somebody backing Jerry Reinsdorf, right? But in my mind, I always like to think, if I'm Jerry, right? If I'm Jerry, not the owner of the White Sox, but if I'm Jerry Reinsdorf, I have a desire to put my team in the 78. But I'm in no rush. I have a perfectly good stadium on 35th and Shields. I would love to piggyback off the Bears asking for TIF money, and I would love all this stuff, right? But I'm not pressed to do so. So the words, the word choice, outmaneuvered, I don't think that, especially because the opportunity still exists, right? It's not as though they've closed the door on the 78 for the White Sox. So if anything, this helps them, right? Think about if you're the one responsible for. I don't know why I'm so high on the White Sox, but if I, as a White Sox owner, had to bear the responsibility of developing the 78, right? That's a huge cost. And then all of a sudden, a smaller team, let's be fair, I work for the Fire, but in the grand scheme of things, the Fire is smaller than the White Sox. A smaller team comes along and is going to put $650 million into that area. Related, as a result, has to then develop the rest of it, right, with the TIF money that they're going to receive. And so me as an owner, my costs just went down, right? So again, I think it's very savvy. I don't think he got the rug pulled over him. I think if anything, all this stuff works in his benefit, because it's now a more desirable piece of land. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to put parks and condos, or do I want to put a ballpark, in that area? And I think these are the decisions these guys are going to have to make.
Another quick timeout for those listening on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. But more with Gabe Ramirez is coming up after the break. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot like we saw last night or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Now, the smart way to play is the FanDuel's traditional money lines, the spreads, and the over-unders. But if you want to win big, it's the parlays, props, and futures that you want to play. There's always a chance to at least double or even triple your money and win even more by going with the parlays, props, and futures. For example, if you think Indiana is going to pull off a championship run and Pascal Siakam wins the Finals MVP, that is at plus 2,100 the last time I checked, and $10 on that hitting pays out $210. Oklahoma City winning it all. A lot of people think that's going to happen. And maybe say Chet Holmgren actually ends up winning his final MVP. That is at plus 11,000 the last time I checked, and $10 on that hitting pays out $1,100. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. Yeah, and none of that, like, I like how you're saying I don't want, to some fans, and I part of the things that I like to do in the show is inform, entertain, and challenges. I think sometimes we have to isolate different things of Jerry Reinsdorf. We can be very upset with how Jerry Reinsdorf does run the team and how he was operating like it was in 2005 and how he hasn't signed basically the going rate for talent. I think that is perfectly fine. But as you're saying, when it comes to other things, like, again, just being a businessman, yeah, he's actually won a title being a businessman. He just kept thinking you could win a title being a businessman when it's like, nope, the game's evolved. It's changed in that way. So I fully agree with you. The one thing that I love about your work is you are a solutions guy. I love how you always bring that up. I love that when you're on the score saying, hey, what are the solutions? And to some of the hosts too, like, would be like, wait, you're asking me to come up with a solution? I'm supposed to do an opinion.
Already giving me your complaints. We need solutions. Yeah, exactly.
I love that type of stuff. So for the White Sox, let's say they don't go to the 78 for whatever reason. Do they? Because they do have to eventually solve their stadium problem because the lease runs out in 2029. Mm-hmm. Do you stay in Bridgeport and say build Comiskeyville, as I've been calling it, in the parking lots? Maybe the Michael Reese site. Do you work with the city to redevelop Soldier Field, or do you go with the Bears, Darlington Heights, or do you build by the Top Golf in Naperville?
Yeah, I mean, if it were me, I mean, look, I think to Mark Cuban, who said, I wanted to sell the Dallas Mavericks because I'm not a real estate developer and I didn't want to create this community around where the Dallas Mavericks play. Understand it. You see the Bulls doing it, right? Where they're investing $10 billion into the area around the United Center so it can be a community. That's the future of sports. Everyone is trying to create a district around their stadium, as are the Chicago Fire, right, in the present. So for me, if you have a stadium already and your sole objective is to get more bodies there for a longer period of time, and again, I've praised Jerry's wherewithal when it comes to his business acumen, then it seems like a simple solution to then take the same way he did by the United Center, take some of your parking lots and turn them into something, right? And I think that's what I would do if it were me. 35th and Shields. I mean, listen, I'm a lifelong Chicagoan. I know half the city don't go south of Roosevelt, but 35th Street is not bad the way people think it is, right, in their heads. And so I get when people hear South Side, but like Bridgeport is nice. I don't know if people know this or not. White people live in Bridgeport. It's wild to think, right? But they do live there, right? And so, I mean, you're talking about Chinatown nearby, Bridgeport. I mean, it's a great area. So, but all you have to do is give the people something to travel to. Where right now there's just the ballpark and a couple of bars, right? So if you give me something or a place I can go or a place I feel comfortable and safe in, then I think more people will be prone to go into the area. So again, if it were me, my solution would just be to develop the area and get your money back that way.
Yeah, I'm actually fully on board because the only thing that I think they really need to do with Wright Field is kind of like what they did at American Family Field. Get rid of that big, banquet hall that they have, on that, because half the time people aren't eating there. You've got a great restaurant basically throughout the entire ballpark to begin with. So like put a Top Golf in there, for example, like they did, or
you talking about the beer cave?
Not the beer cave. I'm talking about what is it? The
center field?
Club
levels
there. Yeah, that type of stuff. Either way, just put some other amenities. Basically make the ballpark open 24 hours, 365 year round, that type of stuff. And otherwise, you're right. Develop the land around there because I'm fully on board. I think Bridgeport has always gotten a bad rap. I mean, I grew up in the far northwest suburbs, and I was a White Sox fan, and my dad took me to Sox games, even at Old Comiskey Park, and never did I not feel safe, because guess what? There's security around there. And then, like you said, the Bridgeport has actually gotten better. I just think it's this old stereotype dog whistle stuff that's been going on to make it seem like, oh, Bridgeport, oh, that's rough. It's been rough since like the 50s, when my grandpa used to have to pay kids to watch his car. That's when it was rough.
Yes. I mean, and like I said, I think Chicago as a whole, right, with social media, with cameras, with phones, just like it's not on that same level. And then again, I think if you overwhelm an area with positivity, right, that's going to be the result. And so, I'm trying to think of another area in Chicago where, think of like think of the West Loop, right? I mean, my grandfather used to drive trucks in the West Loop and deliver food across Chicago. And I used to go with him when I was a kid, and we would drive into Fulton Market all the time, pick up all the produce and go drop it off. And that area was horrible, right? Horrible. My grandpa used to carry a machete with him, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, but now to see it, right? But what did you do in the West Loop in Fulton Market? You just overwhelmed it with positivity, where people felt comfortable, safe. Everyone kind of just congregated there. So nothing was going to happen in that way. And I think the same thing could apply, for Wright Field. And yeah, it's a hard narrative to change, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible to change the narrative surrounding, Bridgeport and Comiskey. So I think it's something that can be done. And, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe Ishbia takes his money instead of building a stadium in 78 and redevelops an entertainment district over there.
Yeah, and the one thing, just circling back, and I've got just a few more questions before I let you go. Mansueto, for example, one of the reasons why I like what Joe's doing is he's not going to the 78 because I can get a better fan, like Jerry's saying. He's going to the 78 because he wants just better, he wants his own place. He doesn't want to have to be at the beck and, call of the Chicago Bears and the Chicago Park District, and I really respect him for doing that.
Yeah, I think I just got an email probably about, a couple of days ago, from my match day operations manager, shout out Aaron Cox. And it was talking about, the movement of games from Soldier Field to SeatGeek Stadium, because the Bears, or the NFL, I should say, they can't have anyone in stadium like 2 or 3 days before and 2 or 3 days after. That's like the rules of the NFL. So once the schedule drops and you're seeing when the preseason games are and your home games are at Soldier Field, then the Chicago Fire have to adjust, right, and send everyone to SeatGeek Stadium. And I think that's a big thorn in the side of Joe Mansueto, right? He's saying to himself, I'm a billionaire. I'm sure he's not saying that, but he's like, I'm a team owner, you know what I'm saying? My team is a top flight team in a top flight city. Why am I beholden to the Chicago Bears? I should have my own stadium. And I think that's what, really turned him on to the idea of creating something in the 78 right next to the South Loop. So much transportation right there. It's the center of the city, so to speak. So I just think it's a win-win, as I've mentioned several times over, all around for everyone involved.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I'll be back on Monday to discuss how top hitting prospect Kyle Teal did over the weekend, as he has been called up, and a Minor League Monday report. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion with Gabe Ramirez. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, have a great weekend, and I'll see you Monday.